Hi guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to open up .text files or .dat files and import them into Excel using VBA. Before we do that, go to excelvbasequel.com. There's almost 35 hours of free video for you guys to watch. You can learn about Excel, VBA, and a bunch of other stuff. In a previous video down here, lesson 20, we talked about the file system and we showed you how to open all the files in a folder. So you could specify a folder, it'll open all those, it'll actually list all those files in an Excel worksheet. And then we looked at how to open all Excel files in a folder. So we're familiar with that. If you haven't watched these videos, go watch it. This video has to do with someone writing in. So they wrote an email and they said, they basically have this situation. They have a folder like this. My folder is text and dat files. And inside of it, they have different files. They have dat files. Here's a dat file. Here's another dat file. And here's a text file. And here's another text file. And what they wanted to do is, let me just open one of these files up. You got to open the dat files with Notepad. So here's the dat file. It's just a bunch of data separated by spaces. So here's a column, here's another column, here's another column. They're separated by spaces. Notice that the width of the columns doesn't always have to be the same because the spaces delineates them. So here I put, as a test, I just put 111 for the first entry in the first row. So just to show you that the width doesn't need to be the same. If I open up the other dat file, you can see I put 333 here just to test it out. Again, these are .dat files. They're separated by spaces. So they call that delimited by spaces. If you open up the text files, I put 222 here. So this is a .txt file. It's the same thing, same kind of data. I just changed this to 222. So again, it's separated by spaces. And then again, another text file with 444. So what this person wanted was to open all these files and take all this data and put it into an Excel sheet. So they want to do first, deposit this data into Excel sheet, open up the next dat file or next text file, and put that below it into the spreadsheet, and then open up the next text file and do that. So like an importation of multiple text files and multiple dat files, and that's what this workbook does here. If I open this up and we look at it, you can see that here's the data, right? Here you can see we have our data from those files. Here's that 333. Here's all the columns, and actually we put another bit of information. We put the name of the file. So here's that data2.dat, and here's the data.dat file. So we did exactly what we wanted, and we're going to show you how to do that. But before we do that, I'm going to show you exactly what I did to get to this point, to be able to write this macro and do this stuff. So what I did, I opened up a new Excel, and I don't know how to, off the top of my head, how to import dat files and import text files, but what you can always do, and I recommend this, is go to the developer tab and record a macro. So this is what I did. I went to the developer tab, recorded a macro, I pressed OK, and I went to the file tab, and I went to open because I want to open a file. And again, I'm doing this because this is the first step I took. And now I go down here, and usually when you want to open up a file, it's an Excel file. So you see this little drop down here. It says, what file name, and it falls under the category all Excel files. Well, I don't want an Excel file. I want a dat file or a text file. So I'm going to change this to all files. Now I can open up different types of files. So I could go to my desktop, and I can scroll down to my folder, and now I can select a dat file or a text file. And when I do that, a wizard pops up, this text import wizard. With this, we can do some things. You can see that here down below is a preview of the data. It sort of shows you the data in that dat file. It's exactly what is in that file. And it says, choose the type of file that best describes your data. Is it delimited or is it fixed width? Delimited means it's separated by commas or tabs or even spaces or whatever. In our case, it is separated by a space, so we're going to choose delimited. If it was separated not by any of those things, but by just a fixed width where um, fields are aligned, in certain columns starting at a certain point. So let's say the first 15 characters are the first column, characters 16 to 30 are the next column. That would be fixed width, and you could select that here. But ours is delimited, so we're going to focus on that. And when we do delimited, we could just click next here. Oh, also this start import row. This is an input. It's saying what row do you want to start importing data from this file. So we want the first row. So we click next, and now it asks you what is your delimiter. So look again at our data. It's separated by a space, so we choose space. I'm going to uncheck tab. Again, you could choose these other things like tab, semicolon, comma, or other. Um, treat treat consecutive delimiters as one. This just means exactly what it says, and I'm going to leave it checked. That means if there's multiple spaces between the columns, then it's going to treat it as one space, and that's fine with me. Text qualifier. So this means if you had a double quote, quotation around each of your data, open quotation, close quotation, or a single quote, you could select that, and it would understand that when it's importing. We don't have any of that, so I'm going to put none, and then I'm going to put next, and then here it says you can select each column and set the data format for that column. I know that through doing this, that the import, if you just leave it as general, it's going to do it for you. You don't need to go through and set every column as text, because here you're selecting columns and you could say this is text or this is a date. We don't need to do that. You could just leave it as general. So just leave that as general, and then you could click finish, and look what happens. So what this just did is we were recording a macro that imported a .dat file to Excel, and we have that right here. Notice that this first column here is a space column. There's nothing there, and that's because if you were to look at the data, let me open up this data. You can see that there's a space here, so it counts that as a column. So, when I showed you the end result, we don't have that. So let's record a little bit more here. Let's record a little bit more, and let's delete this column because we don't want this in the end result. So I'm going to highlight that and just delete it. And again, this is good because whatever you want to do, just try it out with the macro recorder, and you'll have the code written for you. And we're going to look at that in a second. The other thing I want to do is put the name of the file in this column. So I'm going to do that. The name of this file is data, and I want to autofill it down. So I put it in there, select the cell, and I double click this, and that's the autofill, and that's also going to be recorded. So now we can stop recording, and we could go look at the macro. So if I do Alt F11, and I go to the Project Explorer, I can go up to Book 1, look at the modules, and look at Module 1, and this is what was recorded in that macro. The first line here, it just sets the directory. So chdir, you could Google that, and it'll tell you that it sets a directory for your VBA macro. You could change that if you want. I know that we don't need this, so we're not going to be using that. That's just something the macro recorder writes. It sometimes writes extra stuff that you don't need, and that's one line. The main point of this video is to help you understand this highlighted bit of code here, workbooks.opentext. This is a function that basically, this is the code behind the wizard. You could see that when we went through the wizard, we had to set a file name. So here's our file name. So this is going to be how we're going to tell, this is going to be the function we're going to use to import these data and text files. And we're going to need to tell it what file to use, and we're going to have to use the parameters like this. Here's a parameter for file name, so we have to give it a file name. We have to give it an origin and a start row. So I don't know what these things are, but let's take a look. So before we take a look, let's just go through them. So I don't know what origin is. We'll find that out in a second. Start row, we know what that is. That's where you want to start importing. Data type, in the wizard we chose XL delimited. That's why it says XL delimited. Text qualifier, in the wizard we chose none, so that's why it says XL none. Consecutive delimiter, we chose true. We had it checked. Then you have these highlighted things here, and this is what is the delimiter. It's not tab, so that's false. It's not semicolon, so that's false. It's space, so that's true. All the other ones are set to false. And this field info, I don't know what that is. And trailing minus number, I don't know what that is. So basically, how do we know? Our goal is to like be programmers at VBA and and be able to understand this stuff. So how do we know what origin is and how do we know what field info is? So basically, just take this bit of code, workbooks.opentext, and Google it. And if you do that, you'll come to this web page here, or maybe a different one, but it'll describe what this method is. And here, it's talking about, um, you know, what it does. So this function loads and parses a text file as a new workbook with a single sheet that contains the parsed text file data. That's exactly what we want to do. We want to open a text file or .dat file, the same thing. They consider text files, and we want to import that, parse it. And if we scroll down, you can see the parameters right here. It goes through all of them. So here's all your answers. File name, this is exactly what you think it is. You have to specify the file name. Origin, this is what we didn't know what it was. So this is an optional parameter. It specifies the origin of the text file. I don't know what that means still. If you read a little more, it says um, it specifies an encoding that the source text file is Arabic, Windows, or it specifies the page number of the code desired. So the point is, it's specifying something that VBA needs to know, and sometimes it could be a number. So in our case, it says 437, and I'm fine with leaving it as that. If I need to, uh, you know, deal with this later, I could come back and Google more on this origin thing. But right now, fine. We understand what that is. It's right there. You can read it. Start row, we know what that is. Data type. Um, this says, is it delimited, XL delimited, or XL fixed width? So we know that in our macro, if you go back to it, it says XL delimited, and that's what the website is describing. It's saying, okay, XL delimited. That's what it means. It means it's a data type. Text qualifier. Here you go. Here's your different types of text qualifiers. In our macro, we have our text qualifier as XL none, right there. So we could see that again on this web page. So this web page again is describing that function, workbooks .open text. What else here? Now we get into the tab semicolon comma. So this is doing exactly what we thought it would do. If it's set to true, then it's saying the delimiter is whatever it is. So in our case, we have space set to true. We could have, if it was tab delimited or semicolon delimited, you just set that to true. Uh, here's the main thing that we don't know though. This field info. What is field info? Um, so it says field info here is an array containing parse information for individual columns of data. The interpretation depends on the value of data type. Remember, data type is XL delimiter or XL fixed width. When the data is delimited, this argument is an array of two elements, of two-element arrays, which each two-element array specifying the conversion options for a particular column. The first element is the column number. So the first element is the column number. The second element is one of the XL column data types specifying how the column is parsed. And these are your XL column data types. So what does this mean? That means if it's delimited, and ours is delimited, right? Then what this means here, if you read that website, it says this first element says it's the number of the column. So this is the first column, and what is the data type of that column? Well, it's 1. And this is the second column, and what is the data type of the second column? Well, it's 2. And this is the third column, and what is the data type of the third column? It's 3, and so on and so forth. What this does is it's an array. So they said it's an array of two-element arrays, and here's your two-element arrays. Here's one two-element array, here's two two-element array, here's 3, and so forth and so on. And it just tells VBA how when it opens this text file, what the columns are, how many columns there are, and what data types there are. so it knows how to deal with it. Um, that's if it's delimited. If it's not delimited, you can see down below it says if it's fixed with, the first element array specifies the position of the starting character, and the second is the parse option from above one of these things. So the main takeaway there is that if this wasn't XL delimited, if it was fixed with, then this field info would be, instead of being just a column number, it would be the start position of the column. So does that make sense? And then this trailing minus numbers, if you look in here on the web page, it doesn't tell you anything. So that's not uncommon. I mean, Microsoft is very thorough, but sometimes they're not, and they just leave it. Who knows what that is? So you don't really know, but we know enough now to write this whole code. And then we have some code here. So we're done with this code. This code was the crux of the video. This is going to give us what we want. And the main thing here is specifying the text file. Which one do you want? This is going to be changing during a loop, right? We're going to be importing .text and .dat files. So we need to change this path somehow, and I'll show you how to do that. Then we deleted a column here. We deleted that column because we didn't want it, and then we autofilled it. So here's how you autofill. Basically, when you autofill, you provide you put something in a cell. Here I put in data. Then you select the cell, and then you do selection.autofill. And after that, you put the destination. So if you want to autofill data from I1 to I120, you would do it like this, right there, basically. Okay, so now, after seeing this code, basically what I did is just write code around it, because this is the meat of the video. This is really all you need to do for this video to do what that person who wrote in wanted to do. So I'm going to close this now. And now we can go to the real code, which is in this workbook called import multiple txt or dat files. And I'm going to post this to the web after the video is done. But we could go into the editor, and here's the actual code that is going to do what we want. I'm just going to move it over here. So what I did first, I know I needed to declare some things. I declared a workbook object. So I declared main WB as a workbook object. I declared another workbook object, dat WB, as a workbook object. If you haven't done that, which is not unusual, you can do that. You can declare an object as a workbook. I declared file name as a string, and then this is an array, a string array. And then this is start row. I declared that as long. Next thing I did, I set the active workbook to main WB. So when you're dealing with a workbook object, you have to use the word set. So remember that. So I set this active workbook, which is this, import multiple txt. I set that to this object, right? That's what this line does. It takes the active workbook, sets it to the object. I set start row equal to 1. We need that start row to know, we're going to be importing data from one file to another, and start row is going to tell us where we're going to import. What row are we going to import? So this tells us import row. Then I just select the sheet, I select the cells, and I clear the contents. So if I run this macro up to this point, you could see it's basically going to just clear out what we have. And there you go, it just cleared it out. Cool. Next thing, we want to deal with this folder, right? There's this folder out there. So we need to deal with that folder somehow. And in order to deal with that folder, we need a folder object. Somehow we need to get down to a folder object. And if you don't know about these file system objects, go watch those 2 other videos on excelvbasql.com. But basically, we create a file system object, so that's like one level up, by using this create object, which is from this scripting.filesystemObject library. So now we have a file system object that can deal with directories and things, and from that object, well, first you have to use the word set. Remember that, to set that file system object to this new file system object. Once we have this file system object, we can use the get folder function and pass in a path. So here's the path to this folder. Here's the path to this folder, right? I just took this path and I pasted it in over here. And if I paste it into this get folder function, I get returned a folder object. So I set the folder object to the result of that get folder function. Now I have a folder. Cool. So now I can loop through the folder using a for loop. And here I can loop through the folder, and there's a collection of files associated with that folder, and I could loop through all the files in that folder like this for each file object in folder object.files. That's going to be the loop, and then down here you have this next file object that closes the loop. So those two lines alone, this line and that next file object, are a loop, and they'll loop through all the files. Okay, so when I start looping through the files, I'm going to be working with this thing, file obj, and that I want to be able to only open DAT files or text files. So I need to somehow know that the extension of the files in the folder are DAT, and that's what this will do. There's a function called getExtensionName that's associated with this file system object. So you do file system object dot getExtensionName, and you pass in the path of a file. Which file? Well, the file is going to be this file obj, which is what we're dealing with in the loop, right? We're dealing with this. And I'm going to say if the extension is DAT, or I'm just going to paste this in, if it is text. If the extension is text, then I want to do something. If not, I'm just going to end, right? Here's the end of that. So this end if is associated with the end of txt or dat file. And then if it is a text file or dat file, then I want to check that it's not hidden, right? I don't want to deal with hidden things, and that's what this line does. If not file object.attributes and 2. So this is weird syntax, but I explained it in the other video. This will only import files that are not hidden. So again, there's another end if down here, and this end if is the end of hidden if statement. So I like to do this when you have an end if, comment and say what you're ending, because a lot of times when you get a complicated macro, you got a lot of if statements and it gets messy. But then you can go down and you could see what exactly you're ending. Okay, so we're at the point where we have a loop that is looping through all the files in a folder, and it's going to only open .dat files and .text files that are not hidden. And we're using this file obj, and as part of this, if I run this right now, we're going to get to this line and this line. So let's talk about that. This line is going to take the path of this object, this file obj, and it's going to split it into an array. And then this line is going to get the last element of that array. So let's run this and see what it does. If I run it and I do a watch on this, right here, this ARR file name, that is taking the file path, and I should actually put a watch on this so you could see what the path is. If I open up this file obj, there's the path right here. It's separated by these backslashes. There's 1 backslash, there's 2 backslash, 3 backslash, right? And we did this in another video. all this does, this split, it looks at that path, it takes that path and splits up the text in between those backslashes. And how does it know the backslash? Because you specified it. Here's what you want to split, and here's what is going to be causing the splitting. And when you do that, you get this array. Here's the array, ARR file name. Here it is. And you could see it split the path up. It said if there's a backslash, I'm going to take that text and put it into an array. And the last element of that is the file name. So this is how we're going to get the file name to put in the Excel file. And how do we do that? Well, notice I want the fifth element here. I want the last element actually. And the last element you can get by using this U-bound ARR file name. So that, what I have highlighted, equates to the number 5. U-bound says give me the largest size. It says give me the size of this array, or the largest element. And it's 5, right? That's the index of the largest element. So it's 5. And then if you pass that back into the array, here's the array, and if you pass in 5, you're going to get data.dat into this file name. So if I put a watch on this file name here, there's my data.dat, which is what I'm going to put in that last column and autofill it down. So now we have the file name, and as this changes, as this loop changes and we loop through more files, this file name is going to change. And also this path here is going to change. So now we can start using that code that we looked at earlier in the video. And this is it right here. Here's the code. One thing to notice is for the file name, we no longer have something in quotations. We have fileObject.path. So remember that this is a loop, and this file object is going to be changing, and the names of the files that we're importing are going to be changing. You can look in here and you can see the names are different. This is data.dat, this is data.text, this is data2.dat, and data2.text. So they might have the same name, but the extension is different, which causes the actual path to be different. That's why we're passing in this path here, which is going to be different each time through the loop. And we could then pass it to this function, what we looked at before, workbooks.openText. It can run that code. Actually, in this bit of code, I have XL double quote. I should set that to XL none. For the text qualifier. So here's our code. We looked at that. We know what that does. The main thing is this here. We replace the double quotations with a variable, right? Because the variable is going to be changing. And now if I run it up to here, look what happens. When you run this, when you execute this, it does exactly what we saw before. It opens up this data file. Now we're in the data file. And this is the data file, right? Here's the data file. So we just opened a data file using programmatic syntax. What I want to do then is I want to be able to open up a data file, import it, and then close the data file. In order to do that, I have to somehow have an object that I can close. So this is going to allow me to do that. I'm going to do set dat.wb, which is that workbook object, equal to the active workbook. So after you open this, the data file becomes active. So okay, I put that into a workbook object. Then I'm going to delete this column, which is what we saw we needed to do. So there, I delete the column. Well, actually, there's selection.delete. Columns AA.select, selection.delete, that deletes the column. Then I need to know, what I want to do here is I want to take data from this data.dat workbook and select it and move it to this other workbook, right? This other workbook here, import. So I need to know what range to select. So here in this data file, I need to find the last row that I could go down. And to do that, you do end row is equal to range a1.n.xl down. And when you do that, you're going to get end row equal to 120. And what that did again, it just it goes into range A1 and it goes down as far as there's non blank cells. So there's 120 rows of data, and then I want to select that data. So here you go. If I move this over, you can see that now our data is selected. What we want to do now is paste that into a workbook. So now I need to go to the other workbook. How do I do that? That's what this line does. Windows main wb.name. Remember, this main wb is the other workbook. It's the main workbook that we're going to throw all the data in. So I want to activate that using this Windows function. And there you go. You just saw I switched to this workbook. It sort of went from the other workbook to this workbook. And now I want to put that data in. I want to put that somewhere. So I reference this start row, and I say if start row is 1, then select cells 1, 1, and here you go, and then paste it in. So these two cells, it selected A1 and it pasted that data in. So there you can see, now we just took data from that data workbook, and now it's there in this import workbook. So we just imported our first file's bit of data. Now I want to do this autofill, which is what we saw before, but now we need to do it dynamically because we're going to be changing, the start row and the row that we're going to put the data file, the name of the file in. It's going to be different for each file, so we need to keep track of the start row. And to do that, in this instance, I want to put the name of the file in cell I1. But the next time through, it's not going to be row 1 I want. So I need to know the start row, right? And to do that dynamically, you could append a number onto a column letter. So here's range I, and then you append it using the ampersand and start row, dot select, and you put in the file name. There's the file name. Where does this file name come from? Remember, it comes from this array, file name, and then we pick the last element out and put it into a variable. So there's file name. And then here's the autofill. You select that cell, and then you want to autofill it from the start row and the start column, right? I1 down to I120, right? Because there's 120 rows of data. If I scroll all the way down here, so somehow I need to know to stop at row 120, and I can do that by doing a calculation that simply says this: autofill it from I1, which is what this says right here. This is going to give you I1 to I120. That's what this number will be. I120 is going to be start row plus end row minus 1. So remember, start row is something we're doing in this workbook, import workbook, and we're keeping track of what row we want to import our data in. End row is coming from the data workbook, the other workbook. Remember up here, this end row is coming from the data workbook, right? This is when we're in the data workbook and we get how many rows of data are there in that data workbook. So we can use that to know how far we need to autofill down. Basically, we know how much data we have and we can autofill accordingly. So when I press this, let's go up here. Did I delete something? Let me just run this one more time. I think I deleted something. Oops. I think I deleted something, so let me just run this. Yeah, so I deleted something there, but you could see that the autofill works. You know, if you scroll all the way down, it goes exactly down to 120, which is what we want, right? So now, where are we at in the code? We're at this point where, um, we just got out of this if statement here. If start row is equal to 1. And why do we have to do if start row is equal to 1? Well, because when you do this, when you do XL down, it doesn't work when there's no data in the first cell. So somehow you need to know if you're in the first import, then import into cell A1. So that's what this is doing. Um, and then if it's not the first import, then we're going to do this code here. And I'll walk you through that in 1 second. But that's why we did that if statement. Now what are we going to do? Right now at the point in the code, we still have the data file open. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that data file. There we are, back to the data file. And we're going to close it. There we close it. So active workbook.close. After you activate it, it becomes the active workbook, that data file, and you close it using .close. And this false means you don't want to save changes. Then we go back to the main workbook, and we need to find a new start row. So we go to the old start row, which is, here's the old start row. If I put a watch on this, it has 1, right? That's because start row was 1. And what we do is we go to that cell 1 1. Here's start, cells 1 1, and we go down as far as we can. And then that is going to give us the new start row, which is 120. So now you see the start row is 120. So this is a critical part of the video. You need to know where to import the data, into row 1, and then next time through your into row you know you're at row 120 where your last data ended. We actually want to insert it in row 121, but I'll show you that in a second. Then I just save it and say okay, cool. Okay, so I'm not sure. So let's continue and let me run this again. We'll get to the second. I'm not sure what that error was. That didn't happen before. Guys, sorry. Somehow there's a 1 that got in here. So it says object required. And those things, they're tricky. Sometimes you might not see that, but there was a 1 in here that was causing that problem. So let me run this macro up to this point. We import the first data. There it is. We're at row 120. And now we loop through and we go back up to the next file. And you could see, if we keep stepping through, that the file name changed from data.dat to data.text. So that's exactly what we want. Now we did one file, now we're doing the next file. And again, we're going to use this function to import the data, or actually no, to open up the workbook. There it is. There's my data.text. Again, we are going to activate that data workbook. We're going to delete the column, and we are going to find the end row. So the end row again is 120. So all these data files have 120 rows in it. We're going to copy that selection. And now we get to this point, if start row is equal to 1. Well, we know start row is not equal to 1, so we fall into this place. Start row is equal to start row plus 1. And what that means is we want to insert in row 121. So I know that. So then I can use these lines here to go into range A121. That's what this did here. So basically what we did there is we had a bunch of data in our import workbook, and we wanted to now put the next bit of data into that same workbook, and we needed to know what row to put it in. And this start row sort of keeps track of that. And when start row is not equal to 1, you know that you just got to increment it once, and you're going to be in that cell 121. And then you could paste it in. So now if I look at this, you could see what's going on. Here was our first importation of data, right? And here's our second importation of data, which we just did. And now we're going to fill in the file name for the second file. And again, we're going to autofill the file name down. So there you go. After that, there's the autofill. And you can see there's data.text and there's data.dat. So did it work? If we go all the way down, the autofill did work. And you can see that here. It goes down to row 240. Like I said, each data file has 120 rows. Next thing, we do exactly what we did before. We activate that data file, we close it, and we just keep going on. So now if I take the breakpoint off and I run the rest of this, you'll see that the other files are going to be imported as well. So let me take these breakpoints off. Maybe I can't take it off right now, but I'm running it. So there you go. And now you can see we have 480 rows, right? Because we have 4 files, and they're 4 different files. And you can see that because here's data2.text. If I keep scrolling up, here's data2.dat, right? It starts in row 360. And if you just, we saw the other two that they worked. So basically, we did exactly what that person wanted. We took .dat files and .text files, and we imported them into Excel, and we were able to do that very successfully, aggregating the data like one on top of the other, and also doing something a little bit extra, putting the name of the text file that's associated with this data into the column so you know where it came from. Let's say though the original question, the person only wanted to do DAT files. So if you only want to do DAT files, then you just take this out, this text file, and now this if statement says, go through all the files here for each file, go through all the files, and only if it's a DAT file, do something. That's what this if statement is basically saying. If it's a DAT file, then do something. So if I run this, we should only get 240 rows because we only have 2 DAT files, and here you go. Here's 240 rows. I just ran the macro, and there's data file 2.dat, and then if you scroll up, here is data.dat right here. So you can see this macro works, and the main couple takeaways from the video, right, are this function. Google it. We Googled it. We found out what it means, and what this field info does. Is that important? Yes and no. It's important because you need to know what VBA is doing. So if you needed to handle this field info thing somehow, you could know. And also when you talk to people at work, you could understand these things. And no, it's not important because the wizard did it for us. You record a macro and it'll do it for you. But what is important is to know how to change the code so that you can get a programmatic macro to work like this. And we changed our code by doing this. This is a big part. We created a loop, and in that loop we have this file object, and we're passing in the path of this file object. Each time it changes, this thing is changing. There's some relationship going on here. The dynamic is that this is changing, and that's allowing this whole thing to work. Everything else, selecting workbooks, you do it like that, right? You set a workbook object up, and you're able to activate it. And that allows you to go through workbooks. You can select one workbook and then select another one and do things. And then pasting it in, right? The first time you paste in, it's a little different than the next time, the non-first times you paste it in. which is why we did that else statement. But that is the macro. So what I'm going to do is take this macro and upload it. I'm going to upload it to the website, excelvbasql.com. If you want, you can download that, or you could just watch that video or the other videos. Another thing is that, if you have questions about statistics or Excel or option pricing or SQL or anything else, physics, let us know and we'll try to help you out, put up videos. Until the next video, always, put your email in here and subscribe when new videos go up and contact us. Let us know what's going on. Thanks. Bye.